The red ships fell from the sky like burning stones. They came without warning on a Tuesday morning when most people in Seoul were drinking their coffee and getting ready for work. Commander Lee Haen stood on the bridge of the New Dawn, Earth's newest and fastest spaceship, watching the alien vessels tear through the clouds. The ships were not like anything humans had ever built. They looked like giant crystals with sharp edges that caught the sunlight and threw it back in angry flashes. These were the Pyrothi, and they had come to steal the sun. "Commander, we're losing contact with the moon base," said Lieutenant Park. Min. She was a young woman with steady hands and a calm voice, but Hyen could see fear in her eyes. Through the big windows of the ship, they watched something terrible happening to their world. The ice at the north and south poles was melting so fast it looked like someone had poured hot water on snow. The oceans were starting to bubble, and Steam's hands shook as he watched reports come in from all over Earth. The aliens had machines that could suck heat right out of the planet's core. They were turning Earth into a giant battery, stealing all its energy to feed their crystal bodies. Captain Kim Woo was leading the escape ships from Mars, trying to save the people living there. Major Choi Hanna was doing the same thing at Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, where humans had built a small city under the ice. "How long do we have?" Hyun asked his science officer. "Maybe 6 hours before the atmosphere burns away completely," came the answer. 6 hours. That was all the time left for the human race. Hyun picked up the radio that could reach every human. "Ship in space." His voice was strong, even though his heart was breaking. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayen. Listen to me carefully. We are not dying today. We are not extinct. We are just beginning something new." Far below on Earth, people were running and screaming as the sky turned red and the air became too hot to breathe. The Pyrothi ships moved slowly over the cities, the crystal hulls glowing brighter as they drank up all the heat from the world. Below, they had done this before to other planets, other people. It was just business to them. The leader of the alien fleet was called Velthok. He was old, even for his kind, and his crystal body was the size of a building. He had watched 1,000 worlds burn and had never felt sorry about it. To him, humans were just bugs that needed to be swept away so his people could eat their fill of starfire. "The small ones are running," reported one of his officers. "Should we destroy their ships?" Velthok made a sound like breaking glass, which was how his people laughed. "Let them go. We'll die in the cold dark between stars." "We have what?" "We came for." But the alien commander was wrong about humans. He did not understand what they were really like. On the New Dawn, Hyun was already planning. He called together his best people, the ones who would help save what was left of humanity. "We can't fight them now," he told them. "We're too few, and they're too strong. But we're still alive, and that means we still have hope." The evacuation was chaos. Ships of all sizes were flying away from Earth as fast as they could go. Some were big military vessels like the New Dawn. Others were small family ships or cargo haulers that had never been meant for deep space travel. They carried whatever they could: people, animals, plants, computers full of human knowledge, and most importantly, human children who would grow. Up among the stars, Dr. Yoon So, the fleet's chief scientist, came to Hyun with tears in her eyes. "We're leaving everything behind," she said. "Our history, our culture, our home." "No," Hyun replied, looking at the faces of the people around him. "We're taking the most important thing with us. We're taking ourselves. Someday we'll make them pay for what they've done." As the human ships disappeared into the darkness between stars, Earth continued to burn. The Pyrothi fed until there was nothing left but a dead rock circling a weakened sun. They had gotten what they wanted, or so they thought, but they had made one terrible mistake. They had let the humans live. In the cargo holds of the fleeing ships, children slept in their parents' arms. These children would grow up in the cold and dark of space. They would learn to be strong in ways their parents never had to be. They would remember what happened to their world. The Pyrothi thought they had ended the human story. Instead, they had just turned the page to a new chapter, one that would be written in ice and fury. In the cold spaces between the stars where hatred could freeze into something harder than diamond, the war was over for now. But the real battle had not even begun. 23 years had passed since Earth died. Admiral Lee Hyun was no longer the young commander who had led the Great Escape. His hair was white now, and deep lines marked his face like a map of all the hard years. He stood looking out a thick window at the endless black space around there. New home. Frosthaven was built inside a giant rock floating in space. It was the biggest place where humans lived now. It's carved out like a cave, but filled with corridors and rooms where thousands of people made their lives. The walls were always covered with a thin layer of ice, and everyone's breath made little. White clouds when they talked. It was cold, but it was home. Dr. Yoon-soo walked up to him, her footsteps echoing in the metal hallway. She was older too, but her eyes were still bright with the fire of discovery. "Admiral, I have news about the children," she said, her words making small puffs of steam in the cold air. "What kind of news?" Yoon asked, though he thought he already knew. "Hush. The ones born here are different from us. Not bad. Different. Good. Different. They can handle the cold better than we ever could. Their bodies have changed to live in this place. Their minds work differently too. They can think about space and directions in ways that amaze me." Yuan looked down through the window at the people walking through the corridors below. He could see families with children, all of them wearing the thick clothes they needed to stay warm. But the children moved differently than their parents. They seemed more comfortable, more at home in this frozen place. He spotted Jin Ho, a boy, who was almost 17 now. Jin Ho had been born here in Frosthaven, and he could fly small ships through asteroid fields like he was dancing. His sister Lena was only 14, but she had already figured out how to make their heating systems work much better. She was smart in a way that made the older engineers shake their heads in wonder. "Look at them," Hyun said softly. "They don't remember Earth. This is all they know." "Maybe that's good," Dr. Yoon-soo replied. "They're not sad about what we lost. They're thinking about what we can become." Captain Kim Tae came walking up too. Them with heavy boots that clanged on the metal floor. He was the man in charge of sending people out to dig in the asteroids for metals and ice. His face was always dirty from the mining work, but his smile was bright. "Admiral, we found something important," he said, trying to catch his breath. "We've been testing those crystal pieces we took from the Pyrithy ships that crashed near Jupiter. We found out something that could change everything." Hyun turned away from the window. "What did you find? Crystals break when they get really cold. Not just cold like winter on Earth was cold. Cold like the space between stars. If we can make something cold enough, we can break their ships and their weapons." Dr. Yoon-soo's eyes went wide. "How cold are we talking about?" "-200 degrees, maybe colder. At that temperature, their crystal bodies start to crack and fall apart." Hyun felt something he had not felt in many years. It was hope, but it was also something darker. It was the feeling of a hunter who had finally found the trail of his prey. "We have our weapon," he said quietly. "We just need time to build it." In the months that followed, everything changed in Frosthaven. The children who had grown up in the cold started working with the adults in new ways. They were building things that had never been built before. Machines that could make cold so intense it would freeze fire itself. Jin Ho learned to fly ships that were covered in ice so thick they looked like flying glaciers. Lena worked with teams of engineers to design weapons that shot beams of cold instead of heat. Other children, boys and girls, who had never seen a warm day in their lives, became experts at living and fighting in the deepest cold of space, in the deepest parts of Frosthaven, where the walls were thickest and the cold was strongest. Workshops buzzed with activity. Old people who remembered Earth worked next to young people who had been born among the stars. Together they were making something new, weapons of ice and anger, tools of frozen revenge. The work was slow and careful. They had to be quiet about it because the Pyrithy were still out there, still burning other worlds, still thinking that humans were all dead. But every day, the weapons got better. Every day the children got stronger and smarter and more ready. For what was coming at night, when the work was done, Hyun would stand at his window and look out at the stars. Some of them were already dark, eaten by the Pyrithy. But others still shone bright, and he knew that somewhere out there, other people might be looking up at the sky and hoping for rescue. "We're coming," he would whisper to the darkness. Still alive, and were coming. The Pirathi had made one terrible mistake 23 years ago. They had let humans live. Now those humans were becoming something new, something adapted to the cold and the dark, something that would be very hard to kill. 51 years had passed since Earth burned. The humans who escaped that day were mostly gone now, dead from old age or the hard life in space. But their children and grandchildren were still alive, and they had become something completely new. Commander Park Jun walked through the corridors of the Winter's Edge, his boots making soft sounds on the ice-covered floors. He was the son of Lieutenant Parkman, the woman who had died defending one of the first human settlements from asteroid pirates. Jun had never seen Earth, never felt warm rain or summer sunshine. The cold darkness of space was the only home he had ever known. The Winter's Edge was not like the ships humans used to build. It had started as a giant rock floating in space, but over many years people had carved it hollow and filled it with rooms and machines. The outside was covered with layers of ice so thick that from far away it looked like just another frozen asteroid. No one would guess that inside lived 3,000 people. All ready for war, Jun entered the main control room where his best people were working. Dr. Shin. He was bent over a long metal tube that glowed with blue light. She was one of the smartest people alive, and she had spent 10 years making weapons that could shoot cold instead of heat.
How are the ice spears coming along?
Jun asked her. Better than I hoped, she said, not looking up from her work. These can freeze anything solid in seconds. Even Pirathi crystal will crack like glass when hit by one of these. Nearby, Engineer Ko Min was working on something even more dangerous.
Ice.
It was a machine the size of a room that could make the air around it so cold that everything would stop moving. He called it the Zero Field Maker, and it was the most powerful weapon humans had ever built. Status report, Jun said as he walked to his command chair. Pilot Lim Da turned to face him. She was young, maybe 25, but she looked older because of the scars on her face. All the people born in space had these marks, thin white lines they cut into their skin to show they belonged to the void, not to any warm world. Her skin was pale like moonlight, and her eyes were the color of ice.
Oh.
Fortress cities are ready, she said.
Oh.
The new generation is waiting for your orders. Jun nodded. The new generation was what they called themselves, the Binga, which meant glacier in the old Earth language their grandparents had spoken. They were not the same as the humans who had fled Earth. They were taller and thinner, with pale skin and eyes that could see better in the dark. They could survive in cold that would kill their ancestors in minutes. They were beautiful in a strange, frozen way, like living ice sculptures. These Binga had been training for war since they could walk. They knew how to fight in the cold vacuum of space. They knew how to turn asteroids into weapons and ice into armor. Most importantly, they knew how to hate the Pirathi with a cold, patient fury that had been building for 50 years. A voice crackled over the radio. It was Captain Seo Han, speaking from his ship called Frozen Dawn. His ship was smaller than the Winter's Edge, but it was built for hunting. It could move without being seen and strike without warning. Commander Jun, we found them, Seo. Han said. 3 Pirathi harvest ships in the Kepler system. They're feeding on a star there, just like they did to our sun. They have only a few guard ships with them. Jun felt his heart beat faster. This was the moment they had been preparing. For all their lives, the first real battle against the monsters who had killed their world. How many people lived in that system? Jen asked. Intelligence says about 2 million. They had colonies on 4 planets. Jun closed his eyes for a moment. 2 million people, probably all dead now. Their worlds turned to ash so the Pirathi could fill their crystal bodies with stolen fire. It was the same thing that had happened to Earth, and it was still happening across the galaxy. All ships, this is Commander Jun, he said into his radio. We have our first target. After 50 years of hiding, it's time to show the Pirathi what we've become. Around him, the control room came alive with activity. Limda's fingers danced over her controls, waking up the great engines that would push their asteroid fortress through space. Dr. Shin, you checked her ice weapons one more time. Engineer Komin started the Zero Field Maker, and the air around it began to shimmer with deadly cold. In other parts of the ship, 3,000 Binga prepared for their first battle. They put on armor made from asteroid metal and ice. They checked weapons that shot frozen death, sang old songs about Earth and new songs about revenge. Then let winter begin, Jen said quietly. And his words were carried to every human ship hiding in the darkness. Between stars, the Pirathi had no idea what was coming for them. They thought humans were extinct, just another failed species that had burned up and blown away. As they were about to learn how wrong they were. Winter was coming, and it would be colder than they had ever imagined. The Pirathi ships floated peacefully around the dying star, drinking its fire like giant crystal, mosquitoes feeding on blood. They had done this 1,000 times before on 1,000 different worlds. The 3 harvest vessels were huge, each one the size of a city.
Ow.
Their crystal walls glowing red-hot as they stored the stolen energy inside their bodies. Captain Seo. Han watched them through his ship's cameras from far away. The frozen dawn looked like just another chunk of space ice floating in the darkness. The Pirathi could not see it because it was covered in layers of frozen water that hid it from their sensors. All weapons ready, whispered his gunner, a young woman named Park A, whose eyes glowed pale blue in the dark control room. Fire, Seo Han said quietly. The ice spears shot out from hidden launchers all along the frozen dawn's hull.
Out they were.
Invisible beams of cold so intense they could freeze fire itself. When they hit the first Pirathi ship, the crystal hull cracked with a sound like a mountain breaking apart. The aliens inside the ship died, instantly as their crystal bodies shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The second ship tried to turn and fight back, but more ice spears hit it from different directions. Within seconds, both giant vessels were floating dead in space, their fires gone out forever. The third Pirathi ship managed to send out a distress call before the cold reached it. The message traveled across space to reach Velthak, the ancient commander who had burned Earth so many years ago. Velthak was old now, even for his kind. His crystal body was cloudy with age, and he moved slowly in his command chamber.
Owen.
The message came in. He could not believe what he was hearing.
Humans?
He said, his voice like the sound of breaking glass. Impossible, we killed them all. But the reports kept coming in from across the galaxy. Human ships were attacking Pirathi bases everywhere, moving like ghosts through the darkness. They came from nowhere, struck with weapons of impossible cold, then vanished back into the void. Sub-Commander Krelinoth, one of Velthak's officers, brought him more bad news. Sir, we've lost the mining station at Rigel. The humans somehow turned the entire facility into ice. Everyone inside is dead. How do they survive in such cold? Velthak demanded. No living thing can exist in temperatures that low.
They did.
Not to understand that these were not the same humans his people had driven from Earth. These were their children and grandchildren, changed by 50 years of life in the coldest parts of space. Across the Pirathi communication networks, a human voice began to speak. It was Admiral Park Jun, broadcasting from the command ship Winter's Edge. People of the Pirathi Empire, Chun's voice said, calm and cold as winter wind. You wanted to burn our future? You turned our world to ash and our people to dust. Taste the cold of your own ending. Human attack was not random. It was planned and organized like a military operation. Commander OG led teams of ice miners who could turn entire space stations into frozen tombs. Captain Moon SCO's engineers had built machines that could flash freeze enemy installations in seconds, turning living crystal beings into brittle statues that crumbled at a touch. The humans moved through space like a blizzard, impossible to track or predict. They would appear suddenly around a Pirathi colony, unleash their freezing weapons, then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. Each attack was swift and deadly, leaving nothing but ice and silence behind. On the bridge of Winter's Heart, the newest and largest of the human warships, Admiral Kim Ro, watched the battle reports come in. He was young for a commander, barely 30, but he had been born in space and trained for war his entire life. His skin was pale as starlight, and his eyes were the color of deep ice. "Status report," he said to his officers. "Pyrothi fleet at Vega is destroyed," reported his communications. Officer: "Captain Li Bo's squadron hit them at dawn. No survivors." "Mining station at Altair is offline," said another officer. "Commander Yun Ki froze their power systems solid." Kimro nodded and marked another victory on his star chart. Each frozen enemy ship was a small payment for what the Pyrothi had done to Earth. Each dead crystal being was justice for the billions of humans who had died in the burning. But this was not just revenge. The humans were being careful to rescue any other species they found enslaved by the Pyrothi. They freed alien prisoners and helped refugees find new homes. They were not trying to replace the Pyrothi Empire with their own. They were trying to end it completely. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "we're getting reports that Velthok himself is moving his main fleet to intercept us." Kimro smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Good," he said. "It's time to finish what they started 51 years ago." The war between fire and ice was reaching its end, and winter was winning. The final battle had come at last. Admiral Kimro stood on the bridge of his great ship Winter's Heart, looking out at the most important target in the galaxy. Before them hung Velmer Prime, the crystal city where the Pyrothi had ruled for thousands of years. The city was beautiful in a terrible way. It looked like a giant diamond floating in space, with millions of crystal spires reaching out like frozen lightning. Inside those towers lived the leaders of the Pyrothi Empire, the ones who had ordered the burning of Earth and countless other worlds. Kimro was young for an admiral, like 30 years old, but he had been born among the stars and trained for war his whole life. His skin was pale as winter moonlight, and his eyes were the cold blue of deep ice. Like all the Binga, he carried scars on his face that showed he belonged to the void, not to any warm world. "All ships in position," reported his communications officer. A woman named Li So, whose voice was steady as steel. Around Velmer Prime, hundreds of human ships waited in the darkness. They looked like floating glaciers covered in so much ice that they seemed like natural parts of space itself. But inside each one were weapons of terrible cold and crews ready to finish what the Pyrothi had started 51 years ago. Kimro picked up his radio and spoke to every human in the fleet, and to every settlement scattered across the galaxy. His words were also sent to the Pyrothi, so they would know who was destroying them. "I am Admiral Kim Ro of the Terran Frost Guard," he said, his voice carrying across space. "Velthok, of the Pyrothi Empire, you who burned our Earth and killed our billions, look around you now. See what your cruelty has made." Deep inside the crystal city, Velthok heard those words. The ancient Pyrothi commander was dying, his crystal body full of cracks from the cold that surrounded his world. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never known before. He felt fear. "How is this possible?" he whispered. To his officers, "We destroyed them. We watched their world burn." But his officers had no answers. The humans had returned like winter itself, cold and patient and impossible to stop. Kimro gave the signal, and the human fleet began its final attack. But this was not like the other battles. This time, they were not just destroying the enemy. They were doing something much more important. Dr. Yun Kai, the great-granddaughter of the scientist who had helped save humanity so long ago, activated her greatest invention. It was called the Star Maker, a machine that could bring dead suns back to life. Across the galaxy, in systems where the Pyrothi had stolen all the fire from the stars, new light began to shine. One by one, the dead stars flickered and caught fire again. Planets that had been frozen for decades felt warmth touch their surfaces for the first time since the Pyrothi came. On those worlds, any people who had survived in deep caves or underground cities began to see sunlight again, as Velmer Prime froze solid around him. Velthok watched through his failing sensors as the humans began the work of healing. They were not just conquerors. They were gardeners, planting new suns in the darkness and helping the galaxy grow green again. Engineer Jiang Su led teams that were already working to fix the damaged planets. Captain Bay, in coordinated rescue missions for all the different species that the Pyrothea had enslaved or driven from their homes. The humans were saving everyone they could find, even people who had never heard of Earth. On the observation deck of a new space station they were building, Admiral Kimro watched one of the dead stars come back to life. The light was warm and yellow, not like the cold blue of the human ships, but like the sun that had once shone on Earth. Standing next to him were children from a dozen different worlds, little beings with fur, or scales, or skin of different colors, all of them saved. From the Pyrothea Empire, they looked up at Kimro with gratitude in their strange eyes. A young girl with green skin and 4 arms tugged on his uniform. "Will the bad crystal people come back?" she asked in her small voice. Kimro knelt down so he could look at her directly. "No," he said gently. "The long winter is over. Now we bring the spring." It was true. Across the galaxy, the work of rebuilding had begun. The Pyrothea Empire was finished, their crystal cities turned to ice and their leaders dead from the cold. But the humans were not interested in ruling what was left. They were interested in fixing what had been broken. The war was over. The revenge was complete. But the real victory was not in destroying the Pyrothea. It was in making sure that no other species would ever have to suffer the way humanity had suffered, from the cold darkness between the stars. The children of Earth had returned to bring light back to the galaxy. The future would be warmer then. The past, and it would belong to everyone who chose to live in peace. The long night was ending, and dawn was breaking everywhere at once.